Hey there, hunters, and welcome back to the Gunners Guild. Cera and myself are going to be continuing our discussions about monsters that have gone through a lot of changes over the ages. First, we tackled Glavenus' lukewarm entrance into Iceborne, and then we talked about how much Rathalos has improved over the last few games. So for today's discussion, it's everyone's favorite ape, the Rajang. Rajang has had his ups and downs for sure, and the games we're going to be using as a basis for this are 4U, GU, Iceborne, and Rise. All but Rise will be G-Rank showcases, and honestly, it's not like Rajang gains very many moves in G-Rank. He gets Blanca Ball upgrades, but that's basically it. He's just faster. Plus, I don't want to ignore Rise's Rajang. Anyway, let's dive into this.
Hey there, hunters. Cera here again. Let's start off at the beginning, in the 4th generation, specifically for you. Every hunter had to know the Rajang fight at some point or another. The way that the endgame relic grind worked was by assigning drop rates depending on the monster that you fought. Apex Rajang surprisingly ended up being one of the easier and faster monsters to hunt at the highest level of Guild Quest, which gave out the quickest and best chance at high tier rewards. It was so egregious that it's no wonder Monster Hunter 4U has been lovingly called Rajang Hunter 4U by the community. Now, to clarify before we continue, and just in case we get misconstrued, Rajang was definitely not easy. It's just compared to the other options you had at endgame guild quests, things like Shigari, Megala, and Teostra, Rajang was a cakewalk compared to those. He could still easily one-tap most hunters, and couple that with little to no taunts or cooldowns between a lot of the attacks, hunts could take a turn for the worst very quickly. One of the main reasons why he was hunted so much as well was, besides being very weak to raw damage, his moveset could end up being predictable once you got to know it at a higher level. 4U is the game where every hunter basically learned to play greatsword against this guy. Ask anyone, seriously, that matchup fit like a jigsaw.
So 4U's Apex Rajang was the main topic of discussion here. Apex mechanics were very punishing, and due to the Whitestone system made them much harder than they should have been. Damage checks are all well and good, and a mark of skill for a hunter to beat, but the Whitestone time limit was very severe. Despite this, Apex Rajang was such a tremendously fun fight, even considering that one mistake meant instant death. The fight was mostly well received due to how predictable and abusable he was once you familiarized yourself with it. Plus, the head was still a good hit zone even in the Apex state. This souped up monkey had large taunts after most of his attacks, with enough time to let greatsword users get a full level 3 charge hit, so players that could predict and follow the flow of the fight would be rewarded greatly. Such attacks that were very exploitable were the triple Blanca Ball chain that could easily be evaded with 3 90-degree turns and have Rajang just land right at your feet and you could just prep your greatsword swing there. The hop and trot attack, which was quite annoying to me personally, but he would always follow that up with a back hop if Rajang ran past you, so you can easily set up a greatsword charge behind him and crack him in the skull when he hopped back. Of course, there's also his laser beam, which has got a huge opening as well. That's what most people abuse. And I gotta say, wow, I hated this attack in online lobbies. Raise your hand if you were not the target of this beam and managed to roll into it because it was targeting a nearby hunter or your palico and you thought it was you. Both my hands are up. The last attack he had, which was very punishable, was picking up the world and throwing it at you. Everyone knows this attack, everyone knows Rajang likes to throw objects at you, but only Apex Rajang picked up a very big piece. Easily, it's the highlight of the fight. And once you got up close to the guy, you could easily set up your combo while he throws this giant piece of land across the room.
But not all was well for good old Django. His reputation for being a terrifying fight was not unfounded, but it did have its fair share of problems. Not too many compared with some of the other monsters we tackled, but enough. One of the main things was that for some reason, an attack where he runs away from you to throw a piece of the scenery at you was put into the game. It was so annoying, Rajang would sprint to the other side of the area, pick up a tree or a rock and throw it at you. Completely disengaged you and broke the flow of the fight completely. One of the other problems was with the AI. Older versions of Rajang in lower tiers had some odd AI issues. He could target and attack seemingly nothing, and would just start swinging in a direction away from the hunter, and end up repeating this like 3 or more times in a row. It felt very strange, like, I know Rajang isn't the smartest thing around, but monkeys are monkeys, they're known for being somewhat intelligent, right? I mean, it's not like he's a charge blade user, am I right, fellas? The AI problems were very much an issue of the older games, but it did still persist into Generations Ultimate, so we're going to head over there and check out what changed for our boy Jang.
GU's Rajang is definitely not the terror that he was in 4U though. I don't think we'll ever see a Rajang like that ever again. Maybe Frontier stuff. He does not hit anywhere near as hard as 4U's Rajang, and even Hyper Rajang in GU is nothing compared to 4U's Apex Rajang. It's not for a lack of trying though, Hyper Rajang does one-tap players for sure, he hits like a truck. The problem is that the whole Hyper gimmick was a big letdown for Rajang. His strongest attacks were mostly slow when he used them on hyper, so his laser beam had like a huge windup. I'm talking like 3 seconds plus. It was easy just to walk away from it. Same goes for his huge ground pounds. But again, Jiu's Rajang wasn't meant to fight players who had adept style, valor style, parries, counters, evasion skills, and all that stuff. Jiu's version of Rajang just couldn't keep up with the insane amount of tools and power creep that was given to the hunters. His fight in general didn't really change much compared to the two games, it was just the hunters that changed. But due to that fact, his fight was pretty trivial in GU, and it's not something to fear like his 4U counterpart. Plus, he didn't get a deviant. Come on Capcom, Arzuros gets a deviant but Rajang doesn't? Shame. So let's take this time now to talk about Iceborne's Rajang, because he was completely reworked for the new generation. Now, I don't really know where to start for World's Rajang. Like, we aren't really going to be discussing Furious Rajang, because he's a very different beast from regular Rajang, and we don't really have any other Furious Rajangs to compare it to, so we're just going to kind of leave him out for now. I guess the first thing you'd notice about the Rajang fight in World is the roar. They got rid of his signature roar from previous games, which is interesting because whilst there were changes to the basic noises a monster made, like Brachydio sounding like a little pig being one of them, almost no monsters had their roar changed. It's like Pokemon cries, those things never change, but Rajang's did, and while it is different, I do like World's roar with the preamble of the monkey grunts. It's pretty funny.
The second thing that you'd probably notice is that the tremors are horrible in World. Our buddy Sephiren tested the time comparing to Monster Hunter Frontier's Zenith tremors, and they were almost identical. It's like a full 6 seconds, it's ridiculous. Luckily, they toned down the amount of attacks Jang does with tremors, so mostly it was just the Big Slam and the Blunkable. From there, progressing into the fight, you notice that the head breaks existed. World has this big thing about adding a lot of downtime to monsters, and Rajang wasn't immune. A head hornbreak or a head stagger would cause the monkey to topple, which previously wasn't ever a thing. That's a new thing we got in World. The only way you could topple a Jang before was by going for the back legs, which could be chained with Greatsword but was a lot more difficult to do. Even though Jang would topple on this head stagger and he got this new opening in World, that's fine. You know, he's a monkey, he can adapt to it, he can take advantage of the situation. Yeah, perhaps a bit too adaptive.
Rajang had a very notorious stagger where he would fall backwards before hitting the ground. However, if he landed near a wall, he would catch himself and counterattack, negating the topple entirely. It sounded and did look cool the first time, but then you realize that the new world was full of invisible walls that were just ripe for the taking. Rajang was notoriously bad because you toppling him outside of the arena map was just asking for trouble. And even then, you do have to position him well in that arena. Another topple Rajang had added in the 5th generation was Fap Hands mode. Jang originally got the power to buff his arms and increase their power and defense in 4th gen, but it got an actual name in World, the Rampage mode, but we're just going to call it Fap Hands. You can now hit the tail, and after a tail stagger, he would break out of the Fap Hand moans and topple, giving you more time to get some damage in.
I will say it's a nice callback to the introduction in Freedom Unite, where if you broke the tail, it would knock him out of rage mode, and it's great to see thematically. Whilst it was always a thing, even way back then, it was never this easy though. In prior games, the red arm state was just something you had to deal with, and eventually it would fall off given enough time. Now mostly as well, the tail was a lot harder to hit, and it did have more stagger threshold to get through. One other thing that contributed is that breaking the horns was really the only way to get those rare Rajang horns, and they had a lot of HP. It was about as difficult as trying to break Shara Ishvalda's head tender plate, so you'd be aiming for the face a lot of the time throughout the fight.
But in 5th generation, it's now an opportunity for another topple and free damage, which I find odd. Maybe sensing that the players had a lot of opportunity to damage Rajang, Iceborne added another unique mechanic to the fight. In previous games, Rajang could not be captured in a pitfall trap during his neutral state, he would just hop out of it. But you can still shock trap him in either neutral or enraged states. But here in World, Rajang was given the shock trap immunity during Fap Hands mode. Maybe just to emphasize how powerful these hands are, he could just break the trap, or maybe it's because he's infused with Kirin energy and that shock is nothing, I don't know. But this was new, and now players had to be extremely careful with their trap placements. Speaking of opportunities though, let's talk about his pin attack. See, Rajang gained this very menacing pin attack where he would throw players on the ground, slowly walk up to them, crack his knuckles, and just smash them in the head. Problem with this attack was that it's incredibly easy just to get out of with button mashing, or if you had slinger ammo, you could just shoot him with something and it stops it as well. It's even easier to do when he's enraged since the attack is actually faster and you get more downtime on the ground. And of course, who could forget the jab? For whatever reason, Capcom thought it would be a great idea to give Rajang this super fast jab that knocked you right on your butt. While the attack itself was a minor annoyance, The fact that it knocked you on your butt stopped your movement or rolling, destroying your positioning, and let Rajang set up his next attack while you were right in his crosshairs. Sometimes he'd follow it up with his giant grab attack that was pretty much impossible to avoid at this point, making it a pretty cheeky combo that just rubbed players the wrong way. Not a very fun attack, to be honest. Despite all his glaring flaws though, Rajang still did feel much more alive and natural, and thanks to the AI changes in world, he never really attacked open air or engaged in nothing. One of his more unique quirks was that he was the only monster who can actually counter the player's clutch claw. If he was not claggered, which is the player term for that drooling state to engage a clutch claw, he would just grab the player off his arms and toss them off. It was unique and really gave Rajang some personality for being, a smart monster. As a side note though, and personal gripe, one of Rajang's other new attacks, which was the slam attack, was basically a one-hit KO, and with heavy bowgun, it was impossible to evade the tracking on without evade extender. Quite annoying.
Overall, I do think that Rajang's changes from 4th gen to 5th gen were mostly positive. Outside some of the jank with him grabbing the air and the extra free DPS time with all of the topples, breaks and claggers, his fight was pretty well done. Perhaps since the players did not have the tools that they had in GU, it did feel a bit more akin to a 4U Rajang fight, although again with more downtime and grabbing absolutely fucking nothing. Plus, seeing him throw down with elders really did cement this powerful reputation that was just kind of words up until then. All being said, let's go on and look at his current iteration in Rise.
Now, it's no surprise that I don't like Rise's Rajang fight. Pretty much every aspect of the fight was toned down. He basically never tremors anymore except the ground pounds, but even so, the tremors in general were toned down so they only last like 2 seconds and they don't reach anywhere near as far. It's not as troublesome as an older generation, so it's not something you have to really prepare for. And while I like the changes to the topples, since he no longer grabs the walls and doesn't topple on head stagger, the change to his AI made it unnecessary anyway. Rajang in Rise is incredibly predictable. With certain spacing and proper management, Rajang becomes far too easy to read. After a Blanca Ball, he will always go for the grab if you're more than a few feet away from him, and if he's in Fat Pants mode, he will always use his laser. He also now has taunts and openings after most every single attack he does, giving the players many more opportunities to attack Rajang, like his arm swings. The arm swings attack can actually turn now, it's not a straight line, which is a good change to be honest, but the attack still leaves him open for far too long. Rajang also doesn't seem to do his side hops all that often anymore, and he rarely does his back hop even if he trots past you. His pin attack now is also basically a non-attack. You can easily wirefall out of the pin, and while I get that it's a resource management thing, there's a good chance that you're going to regen your wire bugs by the time he swings at you. And of course, since it's Rise, he also runs away to attack small monsters, so we got that going for him.
As a bit of a side note, sometimes with this series it can feel like a lot of nitpicking about not just various fights, but Rise in general. I think it's personally important to state that it's good to criticize something you like instead of subjecting yourself to blind fanboying. Being able to take the bad with the good and properly expand on both, I personally think lends itself to a more well-rounded opinion, for me, and I hope you see it that way too. Plus, to the watch battery I use for a brain, these AI changes and commenting on comparative differences throughout the years do scratch some nerdy itches. Hopefully you too can find something you've experienced as well, regardless of how you play. Anyways, back to it. Seriously, it can't be understated how easy it is to manipulate Django now. He is not threatening at all. In Rise, it's maybe because we have so much more mobility with wire bugs, silk binds and switch moves, but it really does feel like the monkey can't keep up with players again. The fight's very similar to the World fight, yes, but in World we didn't have all of these tricks to deal with him. It's like going from 4U to GU all over again. The monster didn't change enough to adapt to the playstyle of the Hunters now, or to make him feel scary.
So where do we go from here? We're at a bit of a blind spot with the 5th gen monkey, to be quite honest. At the start of 5th gen, Rajang was G rank only with World, so we only had that to gauge. And now with our insights here from a high rank game, and with his new kid on the block, Grand Golem, storming in, it's really anyone's guess on how similar to Iceborne the old Simeon's gonna be, or if we're gonna get some new tricks in Sunbreak. I'm honestly hoping that they really step up his game and make him a lot more threatening than before. I'm not exactly sure how they would do that with all the extra mobility and tools that we've been given with the whole wire bug situation, but I am confident that Capcom can figure some way to make the fight more menacing, maybe even make him as scary as he used to be. I'd be okay with that, to be honest. He's one of those monsters that should be terrifying. But that's it for us. As always, thank you for watching, and thank you, Cera, for being a co-host as always. Again, though, if you guys don't know, go check out his stuff. He's got informational things, and he's got a lot of fun things to talk about, and a spiffy British accent to go with it. So that's all for us. Good luck out there, hunters, and whatever you may be hunting.